Hi, everyone.
I,
So here we are kicking off our 3-month traversal of Beethoven's life and career with the very first show, and literally starting at the very beginning of his, let's say, published compositional career. The Opus 1 certainly wasn't the first piece he ever wrote. Beethoven wrote a lot of pieces before the Opus 1. But we talked about how he was very measured in his approach to composition last week when we talked about his Opus 18 quartets, that he wanted to start his career modestly and make his mark, and but with avoided the string quartet until 6 years after the Opus 1s were created. So I wanted to refer back, and I was speaking earlier about the Jan Swafford book, and I'll be quoting a lot from this book over the course of the next 3 months. But I wanted to read a passage about Beethoven and his choices in starting his career. He was very measured in his approach to his career. So here's from Jan Swafford, speaking about the beginnings of Beethoven. Beethoven understood which media and genres Haydn and Mozart were supreme in, and which ones had been less important for them. He charted his path with that in mind, genre by genre. Both his predecessors had spent much of their careers composing for harpsichord, while Beethoven was a pure pianist and piano composer. There he could be bold. When it came to the medium of piano trios, Beethoven felt himself on relatively firm ground. Haydn and Mozart had written delightful ones, but for those men, the trio was not of particular ambitious effort. Here also he had room. It helped that the trio was founded on the piano, his own instrument. He would make his piano trios expansive and ambitious. So here's Beethoven. He wants to make a mark on he wants to set the stage for his compositional career right off the bat. And he works in a medium that Haydn and Mozart utilized, but it really wasn't their core part of their repertoire. So he gives us these sets of 3 piano trios, which are quite remarkable. And he also held off on publishing these works. He was, as I said, he was very careful about how he would be putting his best foot forward. And there's a story about a publisher, Simrock, who he was the founding publisher of the Simrock House, which went on to publish works throughout the 19th century of Schumann, Brahms, Dvorak. It was a big publishing house, but the Simrocks were based in Bonn, and they were family friends of Beethoven. So Simrock, Niklas Simrock, the founder of the firm, wanted to publish 4-hand variations of Beethoven before Beethoven was really ready to publish anything. So here's a passage. So Beethoven wrote to Simrock, "I'm inclined to think that you should have taken the trouble to consult me about this. What would you think of me if I were to act in the same way and sell those variations to Artraria, another publishing house? Would that give you anxiety?" And he said he would send Simrock a manuscript with some improvements. "The fact is," he said, "I had no desire to publish any variations at the present moment, because I wanted to wait until some more important works of mine, which are due to appear very soon, had first been given to the world." So he's a young composer, and he's already very aware of his importance and the way that he wants to control how his music comes across to the world. Even back then, he was very firm. He was a very impetuous young man, and he was very confident in his abilities. So he wasn't, the allure of a publishing house printing one of many of his earlier works wasn't appealing to him. He wanted to come out in his own terms and in the best way possible. So what did you think? So we had the first performance of Opus 1 number 1, and that's a group called the Trio Cavatina. Does anybody remember that group?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
we
since disbanded, but let me tell you the members. The violinist is Harumi Rhodes, who is the daughter of Sam Rhodes of the Juilliard Quartet.
Oh,
Yes.
I know Sam Rhodes.
We know Sam Rhodes.
No, Sam Rhodes, yeah, so, as do I. He's a lovely guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Harumi now is a member of the Takash Quartet.
Yeah.
Oh.
The cellist is Priscilla Lee. And Priscilla I've known for 20 years, and she's now the associate principal cellist of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And the pianist is she's Latvian, and her name is Yeva Jokubavachute. And she goes to the Marlborough Festival every other summer. She's a wonderful pianist.
Yeah.
But they had different personal things, and they split up about 10 years ago. But what did you think of that performance?
Liked it.
Well, yeah.
Good performance.
Yes.
But you see that it's very, as I've said, like Beethoven in Opus 1, right off the bat, it's very Haydn-esque, but it's really Beethoven. You hear the fieriness and in his playing, in the music, the tempestuousness, and also the beauty of the slow movement. It's really, really wonderful. And then we went to Opus 1 number 2 in G major, and that was a group from Marlborough, and with our friend Jeremy Denk on the piano. And the violinist was Michi Wianko, who's is a violinist that's very active in New York, but she's also started composing, and she was recently commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera.
Mm.
And the cellist is Sumiri Kudo, who's a member of the New York Philharmonic cello section. So really, these are the type of quality players that come out of the Marlborough Festival. But I mean, I thought it was an incredibly vibrant performance. What did you think of the Opus 1 number 2 performance?
Outstanding.
Outstanding.
You have
Yeah.
to do.
Any comments about the last movement in particular?
Hey, couldn't they have played the Presto any faster?
Exactly right.
That's very good.
Gary took the bait. That's exactly what I was alluding to. The tempo in the last movement was brisk.
I thought it was the best one.
Yeah.
Best selection.
Harumi Rhodes, he played.
Harumi, wow.
Bob, I think you probably it was very effervescent. There was a lot of life in that performance, and of course, I don't need to tell everybody about Jeremy Denk and going on and on about Jeremy Denk. And this was a performance from the early aughts, I think 2002. I don't remember. So a while ago, and I can tell you that I've known Jeremy all this time. And back then, he could push the envelope of tempi almost to the edge where you're like worried it's going to collapse. Like you're like, there's so much excitement that oh my God, it's going to go too fast. But I thought it was a really marvelous performance of that trio. Unfortunately, what's most interesting is that the Opus 1 had 3 trios in it. And we talked a little bit about Haydn and Beethoven and the relationship. And the third trio was the one that Haydn said he should withdraw from publication. He was not happy with that, and that really upset Beethoven. And Beethoven actually saw that as his most important piece in this group. And you can see this by, obviously the scope of the work, but the key of the third trio is in C minor. And does anybody know about the significance of C minor in Beethoven's life? Any other pieces that he wrote in C minor?
The third piano concerto.
Third piano concerto. What's the big one?
The
Symphony.
Opus 111, I think, is that.
Opus 111. Somebody said
Yeah, it was the Fifth Symphony.
Fifth Symphony.
The symphony.
The Fifth Symphony.
That's the one.
So, you know, when back in that day, and Beethoven was the sort of transition to what's known as equal temperaments, where different keys were associated with different emotionality. And C minor was always pegged as a very dramatic key and a heroic key. Mozart rarely wrote in C minor, and when he did, it was very impactful. But other pieces that he wrote in C minor, he wrote the Pathetique Sonata in C minor, which we'll hear next week. The Funeral March of the Eroica Symphony in C minor. And as Gary said, the last piano sonata in C minor, Opus 111. So C minor was this very, very, very important key to Beethoven right from Opus 1. And unfortunately, as I started to say, that we didn't have an archival performance of this trio, which was a really, you know, for me to focus on the Opus 1 trios and not to include the C minor, it was kind of a no-no, but I had no choice. We didn't have history of it on the series. So I wanted to play the first movement of the set of the C minor trio, and I have a recording of the Beaux-Arts trio from 1981. So here is the first movement of the C minor trio.
Okay, is this the quiz show? I think I remember some composer using a triplet followed by a longer note
Oh.
consistently, obsessively throughout a piece but he stayed on one note.
Gary,
Does anybody, can anybody tell me what that was?
you spoiled the whole thing,
Oh,
Gary.
I thought this was a quiz show.
So
we have
does
a
anybody
pineapple?
know what Gary is alluding to? He may be indicating that there could be a similarity in the C minor trio to the Fifth Symphony. Da 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 da, 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 da 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 da. He's using that 3-note motive. Well done, Gary. He's using the same rhythmic impetus that he does in the Fifth Symphony, right in Opus 1.
And Mahler's Fifth, the beginning,
Yes.
the trumpet
Yeah.
part.
What about even the third movement of the Beethoven's Tempest? I mean, it might be a little bit of a stretch, but it's the same da 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 dun da 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 dun da 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 dun. You know, it's he likes that.
He does like it. Good, well done. Yeah. So there's a direct connection with this motivic idea between this piece and later on in the Fifth Symphony, and also in as Brian had said, in the Tempest.
Could you speculate on what was going through Haydn's mind? I mean, to think of withdrawing this piece, which was really such a marvelous piece. I mean, why would he want Beethoven to withdraw it?
You know, it's hard to say. Jealousy, I don't know. Competitiveness, I don't know. It was obviously,
It seems
history
to
has proven.
represent a step forward from the first two trios. It's a more profound work. I mean, there's more in it.
He gets
The-
more
The
competitive.
pupil is outshining the master.
You
Yeah.
think it was that? Just
I don't know. I mean, that's the obvious psychological, you know, scenario that we can create.
what was amazing,
Say.
what you talked about, the motif of 3-1 da 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 dum in its various changes. It's from Beethoven right through, from the beginning of his career, he was able to take a short fragment or short motif and build just enormous structures and magnificent buildings on the basis of taking these short pieces of music and putting them through their various kinds of transformations. It's amazing quality that he had.
And this was a large part of his genius, that he could take a germ of an idea and turn it on its head, flip it, invert it, do all these developmental things with it. And this is why, I don't know if we've looked at the whole scope of the festival, but I dedicated 2 shows, the first of which is coming up in 2 weeks, about, I call it Beethoven, the Master of Improvisation. And in his day, Beethoven was quite famous to be able to do anything on a keyboard on the spot. And this speaks to his inventiveness and what he can do with thematic material and motives. He could take, and that's what, you know, as David was saying, I mean, that's why everybody goes crazy about the Fifth Symphony, because he's taking that little bit and just doing so much with it. And here he is again doing this. And I agree that, you know, that this is quite different than the first 2 trios that we heard tonight. I mean, major, minor, yes, I get it. You know, that's obviously they're different, but the profundity of this one and the very seriousness of this trio is a stark contrast to the first 2. Whereas the first 2 trios are a little bit more set in the Haydn-esque mode, this one is quite different. Quite different. What did we think of the performance? Okay, not bad.
Oh, sure.
Nice to go back and remember how wonderful the Beaux-Arts were. I mean, all 3 of them just, you know, I always have my ear tuned to the Greenhouse was wonderful cello. But it was Isidore Cohen, right? Was the violinist?
That was Izzy Cohen, yes, in
Yeah.
81, yes. It was funny because I don't always like to look backwards at performances, and I was listening to a few different ones, and there was a remarkable recording with Heinrich Schering, Pierre Fournier, and Wilhelm Kempf. That was quite interesting and a little. You should check it out. It's a little slow, but all great players. But this is and there was another one with Kavakos, Marc-Andre Hamelin, and Clemens Hagen was the cellist. And that I would assume is Verbier. That's an all-star trio. So what happens often with piano trios is that they'll take 3 stars and throw them together to create chamber music. And sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not so successful. That's why I defaulted to the Beaux-Arts trio, where in the early 80s, listening to these recordings, they're fantastic recordings. Really, really great recordings of this repertoire. So here we are. We finished with Opus 1. We go to Opus 2, and we had Mr. Axe playing the second piano sonata. What did we think of Manny's performance?
The performance was wonderful, but I have a question. At your introduction to the performance, you said it was written for pianoforte. Were there pianofortes available in the 1790s?
I believe so. I believe that was the transition between with the pianoforte. I could be mistaken. I'll double check for next week.
Mm-hmm.
But my understanding was that it was certainly wasn't for harpsichord, this piece.
Oh yeah, but I thought it might be forte piano at the time.
Yeah, possibly. But the Opus 2 number 2, Manny, yeah, I thought the performance was wonderful as usual with Manny. What can you tell me about this piece stylistically in general terms? Is this a romantic piece? Is it a classical piece? What did you think? Dead silence. I would say if I were to venture a guess with this piece, if I just dropped the needle and I didn't know what this was, I would peg this as, sort of, I don't want to say aggressive, but Mozartian, but a little bit with a little bit more of an edge. I think it's firmly cast in the classical period, that second sonata. But you could see that he's, when he's launching his career, these are the pieces, what's featuring prominently in these pieces? It's the piano part, yeah? So he's taking his expertise and really that's where he's launching his career in these piano trios. Traditionally going back to Haydn, even in his piano trios, the piano was always the most important instrument in the ensemble. So the piano is very, very much to the fore. And again, he sets 3 sonatas in Opus 2, and I wanted to play a little bit of the Opus 2 number 3, the 3rd piano sonata, which again, I think, well, I don't want to give it away, but let's talk about how the 3rd sonata compares to the 2nd sonata. So here's a performance. This is from a recording by the pianist Richard Good from his complete set of Mozart sonatas. And if you haven't heard his complete set of Mozart sonatas, you really should hear those recordings. They're really definitive recordings. So here's Richard Good, Opus 2 number 3, the 1st movement. And then, of course, YouTube cuts right to an ad. Sorry about that.
Would you know what kind of piano he was playing? It didn't sound like a Steinway.
He normally plays on a Steinway.
Did you feel it was? I mean, Richard Good always makes a remarkable sound. I mean, but it sounded, he was able to get some almost pianoforte quality to some of the sounds that I saw that seemed to be produced in my ear, anyhow.
I can double check that, David, but I'm fairly certain that he recorded these on a Steinway. First, what did we think of the performance? Richard's been around for a long time. Do we know Richard Good? Are we familiar with Richard Good?
Wasn't he, at one time, that particular box set of his was the most highly rated of the Beethoven sonatas, as I recall. And I don't know how long ago that was, but I would try to get one. I never did get the whole box set, but I have several individual recordings of Good playing sonatas, and he's generally quite nice. That's coming from a non-musician like myself, but I mean, it's very nice.
I can tell you, I had the great privilege of working with Richard at the Marlborough Festival. And he's an extraordinary human being. And I can tell you, Dan, that it's one of the most important Beethoven sets available all time. And if you're not familiar with those recordings, they're definitive Beethoven sonata recordings. And they came out over the course of a number of years, but I want to say 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's all that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's been several. Well, I don't say several, but there's 3 or 4 new sets come out. There's Igor Levitt. I listened to a couple of his recordings, and they're quite nice. Also, I'm not, you know, but, and there was a Japanese woman whose name escapes me, had a set come out, but because of the 250th anniversary, there have been several, 2 or 3.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to Jonathan Biss put out a set. He's been putting out.
He's working on it. I don't know if he's got the whole thing done yet or not.
Yeah, they're all done. They're done. The last one was released this year.
Okay.
Yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful recordings. Before we get too deep into Richard, what do you think? How would you compare the number 2 with number 3 with this piece?
That's the one we talked about. Number 2, number 3, entirely different.
How so?
It was as if he was teaching Haydn, this is how you do a second, whatever, little movement. This is how you do it. It was very childlike.
Childlike.
Yeah. Not the one? That child.
Anybody else?
More youthful. I think you listen to, my favorites are the last 5, okay? But, you listen to the early ones versus the late ones. There's a maturation going on over that. I don't know what period of years it took him to go from the first to the 32nd. In fact, I'm curious to know how old the man was when he composed the initial trios, because it tells me they're very exuberant.
He was about 21.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love exuberant music. I love Vivaldi. You listen to Vivaldi's Concerto for 4 violins and a cello, and it's just boom, 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 boom. It really gets to me. I really enjoy it. And Beethoven the same way. He's very exuberant, physically exuberant. I don't know how physically that's the right word or not, but he is very exuberant music.
I also sense that similarly to the advancement between the first and the second trios that we heard, that this was quite a jump in complexity. I don't know what we call it, sophistication, but again his his effectiveness in these various transformations of the short fragment that he was able to build into it, I think was a significant step forward from the early one, which was beautiful, but in a sense simpler. This was more complex in my hearing of it.
I
Anybody agree with that?
Beethoven Opus 1 and found out it was published in 1795. So he would have been 25 years old at that time, right?
Yeah.
What struck me, I guess, so much about Beethoven's music, and you heard it so in this sonata, is he takes a phrase that any short motif. I think David mentioned that earlier, and just works the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Transforms it this way, that way, backwards, upside down. In much of his writing, it seems very characteristic.
I think what David was speaking to about this third set and the third of the trio sets rings true. I think he saved the best for last in both sets. I think that this one is more sophisticated than the second sonata. Did anybody notice anything interesting toward the end of the movement? A device that he used that maybe isn't so normal in a sonata?
Oh, that's the one where he can't end it.
Yeah.
He tried to end it, and each time I thought he was ending it, he started again, and that's a Beethoven style, I think.
Yes, that did happen, and he also did it. He faked you out in the development section where you think the recap is coming back, and it's not. It's not the recap. He further developed it. But I'm speaking to something very specific. I want to share the segment of music that I'm speaking to, and perhaps musicians can speak to what I'm looking for. So this is toward the end of the movement. Those two bars, all of this.
Yeah.
What is that?
Like a cadenza.
Bingo. So Beethoven put a concerto cadenza in a sonata.
Oh, that's what it was, a cadenza. Okay.
Which is highly inventive at the time.
That's interesting.
He put it in cadenza.
Mm-hmm.
And then get you back to the tune, and what you were speaking to, Sheila, then you think he's going to end, he restates the theme, and you think he's going to end, he doesn't end, you think he's going to end, he doesn't end, and then he finally ends. So he wrote a cadenza in a sonata.
Ah.
Pretty wonderful. Pretty wonderful. It's very subtle. It's there though. If you're just listening along, there are tropes with the sound of a cadenza that were there if you're listening for it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So here he is in Opus 1 and Opus 2, already just setting the world ablaze and well on his way to a pretty illustrious career. Any other thoughts about tonight's show? Well, thank you.
Great stuff.
Yeah, we heard a lot of great music, and there's a lot more to come. So thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight.
Derek.
We'll see you next week.
You're welcome.
And thank you for putting it all
Thanks, Derek.
together. Your program is outstanding.
Thanks, Harvey. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Night.
Good night.
Night.